So, late on Sunday night, the 13th of July, 2025, a Melbourne suburban train running on the Mernda line derailed just outside Clifton Hill station, ripping down a section of overhead wiring and coming to a stop blocking the junction for the Mernda and Hurstbridge lines. It's not supposed to look like that. A few people have asked for my thoughts on this, and a few people have asked me how something like this can actually happen. As a non-industry, non-expert, professional, amateur rail speculator, it turns out I do have some thoughts about this, so here's a video. First up, let's be super clear. I don't know how this derailment happened. Nobody does yet. Incidents like this are always investigated by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, the ATSB, who always release extremely detailed reports to the public. When that report is released, we can all find out what the cause was together. But what I do want to do here is look at some things that we can work out just by looking at how the train ended up, what sort of situations might have led to that happening, and I also want to address a few kind of odd statements I've seen in the mainstream media regarding this. Okay, a quick bit of background. The train was a 6-car extrapolis electric multiple unit running on the Mernda line in the up direction towards the city. It was carrying a fairly light load of 55 passengers, none of whom were injured. A 6-car X-Trap is made up of 2 separate 3-car sets, each comprised of 2 motor cars either side of a trailer car. The car which derailed was the 5th car in the train, the trailer car in the 2nd set. On an extrapolis set, the pantograph, which collects power from the overhead wire, is on the trailer car. The train came to a rest with the front under the Heidelberg Road Bridge in the middle of the junction, but it's important to note that the junction itself wasn't a factor in the derailment, because the derailed car is all the way back here. It wasn't passing over any points or any complicated track work when it derailed. I'm going to speculate that the most likely location of the derailment was right here, at the end of the bridge over High Street, and I'll explain why I think that in a minute. The train stopped with the derailed bogie just over 90 metres from that point, and the curve speed is 40 kilometres per hour. 90 metres at 40 kilometres per hour only takes 8 seconds, and it takes time for a train to stop, so I'd suggest that the driver responded almost immediately. The derailed car made contact with an overhead wire gantry here, damaging the end of the car and severely damaging the gantry, resulting in the overhead wiring becoming broken and/or misaligned and falling on the roof of the train, causing that big shower of sparks you might have seen in some of the news coverage. The gantry in question was over 100 years old, being one of the original structures from the 1921 electrification of this line, and I think it is worth considering that if it had been a more modern pole, it might have put up a bit more of a fight. A few quick fun facts not directly related to the incident. The 3-car set involved is 854M, 1627T and 853M. It's the second oldest extrapolis set, dating from 2002, and it's one of 2 sets currently carrying a special Indigenous art livery designed by artist Dixon Patton. It's also one of the handful of extrapolis sets that has a name, Flinders Flyer. Right, so how can something like this actually happen? This next part might be over-explaining to some of you, but I know there's a lot of general public interest in this, so I am going to quickly go over a few basic rail concepts so we're all on the same page. The vast majority of rail vehicles ride on bogies, one at each end of the car with 4 wheels per bogie. The bogies rotate independently to the car body and to each other, and have some amount of tilt in order to follow the path of the track. The bogies will be able to swivel at least far enough to manage the tightest curves on the network on which the vehicle runs, but may be able to rotate a bit further, especially if you break some things. I've noticed it's a common misconception among the general public that trains are attached to the track in some way. They aren't. They sit on the track by gravity, which is why there aren't any trains in space. It just wouldn't work. The wheels slope slightly inwards, so they naturally want to stay between the rails and follow the path of the curves. The wheels also have a flange, which will contact the side of the rail on very tight or uneven curves. That's what makes that screeching sound you sometimes hear. So the only thing that needs to happen for a train to derail on a curve is for the flange on the outside of the curve to climb up over the railhead. You are then, as they say, in the dirt. This is a very unlikely situation on well-maintained track, but there are also certain things you can do to reduce the risk of it happening, including lubricating the flanges with grease. We do this with stationary grease pots positioned around the network, as you may remember from my previous video. The other thing you can do is install a check rail, which is a third rail laid inside the running rails on the inside of the curve, which the back of the opposite wheel can contact, creating a second surface to guide the wheel set in the right direction. Check rails are widely used around the world and used to be common here, but at some point they went out of fashion and it's something we just don't do anymore. So back to our derailment. Actually, does this look slightly different to you? My mistake, I've just used a photo from the previous derailment that happened in this area. which also involved the leading bogie of an extrapolis trailer car jumping outside the curve. This was in 2016, and it happened just over 500 metres back along the same track from today's incident, on the other side of Rushall Station. A significant difference here was that that curve is much tighter. It's actually the tightest curve on the mainline network. The findings from that ATSB report were that the insufficiently lubricated flange climbed over the outside rail, and that a check rail would have made the derailment less likely. It even mentioned that there used to be a check rail there in the past. The report also says, the derailment at this point on the curve was triggered by a lateral angular discontinuity at a mechanical rail joint, resulting in a localised increase in the wheel-to-rail lateral force. The network's track geometry standard did not preclude the presence of such a discontinuity. You mean like this lateral angular discontinuity? I took this picture in that exact same spot 3 years after that derailment. So, we can't really say that this current incident has the same cause, but it can't be denied that the general circumstances and the outcome are very, very similar. And at the very least, it does show how this type of accident can happen. Back to 2025, I believe we can narrow down the point of this derailment pretty accurately. I think it happened after the High Street Bridge, because if it was derailed on the bridge, I think we'd see some fairly obvious damage from or to the bridge girder, which has pretty tight clearances. The overhead wire gantry the derailed car collided with is this one here, which basically gives us a 22-metre window, and it's likely to be closer to the bridge, giving the car enough time to deviate far enough to hit the pole. If we look closer at the bridge, we can see something that's quite typical in Melbourne. The sleepers on the bridge are wooden, then it transitions to concrete sleepers immediately afterwards. Presumably when this curve got concrete sleepers, there was no easy way to fit them on the bridge deck. If you go and watch Driver 667's Mernda line cab video filmed just 3 months ago, which I will link down below, you can see the transitions on and off the bridge come with a small height difference, and you can hear the flanges squeal at both ends. If you look really closely, you'll also see there's a bolted rail join on the outside rail right on the transition between the sleeper types. For the rest of our 22-metre window, it's concrete sleepers and continuous rail with a very even-looking geometry. Keeping in mind that we cannot say for sure what happened here, and there will almost certainly be multiple factors at play, I will be genuinely shocked if it turns out that this little bit of track here is not a major factor in the derailment. When the derailment first happened, Metro and PTV described it as an overhead power fault, and a statement in The Age specifically stated that the pantograph had become entangled in the wires, causing the train to derail. Firstly, it's pretty weird to be suggesting any specific cause at such an early stage, but the focus on it being an overhead problem is also weird. This is a derailment in which the overhead was also damaged. Just like rails on wheels, pantographs aren't attached to the overhead wire, they just push up against it, and there's nothing stopping the wire sliding off to the side if it or the train are misaligned. The derailed bogie was directly below a pantograph, and when an electric train derails, it doesn't have to go very far before the pantograph comes off the wire. It can then get tangled and pull the wires down, but let's also not forget here that the end of the car collided with an overhead wiring gantry, which would have immediately pulled the wires all over the place anyway. Pantographs are quite light and fragile compared to the weight of the vehicles they're attached to, and when they get tangled, they just get ripped off. They don't lift the car off the track. The official reason on the PTV website later changed to a significant equipment fault near Clifton Hill. But there were some other statements in the media that I found even more odd. The Age published some quotes from Philip Barker, a rail safety consultant who has probed scores of derailments over his 45-year career. He stated, "It's obviously hit something or it's travelled some distance after derailing. There's something else going on that drives it sideways. It looks like a textbook derailment, but the consequences, how the bogie is so skew-whiff and how the coach has collided with a stanchion, that's unusual. It's not often you see that sort of thing." Meanwhile, an anonymous driver stated, "It shouldn't be twisted under the body, the wheels shouldn't come out and turn almost 180 degrees. It's indicating something underneath has failed badly." After reading these, I was left thinking, do none of these people have model trains? It might sound silly coming from my perspective of someone that hasn't even been alive 45 years and has probed approximately 0 full-size derailments, but I see nothing shocking or surprising about the position of the bogie here. For starters, let's just hit one thing right on the head. Giving benefit of the doubt, when this person said the wheels shouldn't come out and turn almost 180 degrees, I'm assuming they actually meant to say almost 90 degrees. The actual angle looks closer to 45 to me. I wouldn't think too much of this, except I have seen that almost 180 degrees statement picked up and repeated in other articles and on social media. So just to confirm, this bogey is still mostly the correct way around. Luckily, anyone with an intricate knowledge of extrapolis trailer car bogey details can easily confirm this. On an extrapolis trailer with the pantograph end leading, the first axle box on the right-hand side has a single wire attached to it, while on the left-hand side of the pantograph end, there are 2 wires. Here's the same end and side in the accident, 2 wires. That bogey has not rotated anywhere near 180 degrees. The other part of those quotes is that both imply there's something really unusual and surprising about the final position of the bogey, like there's some big clue we're missing as to how it got like that. So I travelled to the Eltham South Electric Tramway and their state-of-the-art Institute for Rail Accident Recreation and Research to see if we could replicate the basic conditions of the derailment and see how the bogey ended up. To be clear what we're demonstrating here, the part we don't know is how the derailment actually happened, and we're not testing that here. We're just trying to show how the bogey behaves once it's derailed and how that leads it to end up in the position we see in the accident photos. We're basing this on the assumption that the leading left-hand wheel climbed over the outside rail for some reason, and here we're making it do that using the latest in accident analysis technology, this piece of wire. Right off the bat, we get the bogey ending up in basically the position we see in the photos. We ran this lots of times, and while it did sometimes behave differently, this was by far the most common result. Here, with a clearer view of the bogey, you can see what happens is that the culprit wheel comes off and finds itself rolling along the very high resistance surface of the ballast. This causes the bogey to rotate until this wheel comes into contact with the rail, which prevents the rotation continuing. From that point until the train comes to a stop, the first wheel ploughs through the ballast, becoming slightly buried. Throughout this, the angle of the bogey has caused the second wheel set to derail on the other side. This is all very consistent with what we see in the photos. One of the quotes suggested it might have hit something, and that's another thing I've seen repeated a lot. It's certainly not impossible and could be one of the factors, but it's equally certainly not required to get the outcome we see here. It seems like the end of the bogey did hit the concrete base of the overhead gantry, but I don't think that's what they're talking about, and I don't think it had a significant impact on the bogey's trajectory. If you're wondering how hitting the overhead wiring pole comes into all this, we ran that through our simulation too. There were also several references in the media to the overall age of the railway, especially in relation to the tight curves, including this from Channel 9.
Attention quickly turning to the age of the track and one of the network's tightest bends.
The rail alignment really dates back to the 1880s with very few modifications since.
We're still none the wiser knowing exactly why that Metro train derailed. What we do know is that this particular design on the Metro network is incredibly old. That, of course, raising some serious maintenance questions.
It's not actually clear what particular design he's talking about there, but just so we're clear, mainline passenger railways have existed for 200 years. This particular railway has existed for 137 years. And that in itself is not a safety issue. The alignment dates from the 1880s, but none of the infrastructure does, and the curves are still within acceptable limits. While the curve at the other end of Rushall, where the 2016 derailment happened, is the tightest on the network, the one this train derailed on is not unusually tight, and tight curves are a thing managed by railways all around the world. The track just needs to be in good condition. So hopefully this has answered a few questions about how this type of incident can occur and how bogies tend to behave once free of the rails. I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't claim to know what the actual cause was, and there will probably be multiple causes, but maybe we'll do a follow-up video once the ATSB report comes out and see if my speculation was heading in the right direction or not. Clearing the train took about 48 hours. On Monday night, Southern Short Haul Railroad came to the rescue with a pair of P-Class diesels. They pulled the first 3 cars out and took them to Victoria Park before returning to tackle the derailed set car by car. I'd gone to bed by then, but if you want to watch comprehensive footage of the whole recovery effort, you can go check out Pania's excellent video. Once the train was cleared, repairing the infrastructure took another 5 days, with trains running again by Sunday night, almost exactly a week since the derailment occurred. The dip coming off the bridge was ironed out, and 5 new wooden sleepers were used to replace the first 5 concrete ones, meaning the transition between the 2 sleeper types is no longer right at the bridge end and right under the rail join. Incredibly, 2/3 of the overhead gantry survived, with just the damaged vertical part being replaced. During the 7-day cleanup, buses replaced trains from the city all the way out to Reservoir and Heidelberg. Oh, and just for fun, they were also separately replacing trains between Heidelberg and Eltham due to the freeway construction at Watsonia. Yay. As one last thing, rail accidents like this always look very dramatic, but keep in mind that regardless of occasional faults, you're still about 60,000 billion times safer on any train than you are on the road, so it's not something I'd be concerned about as a passenger. Thanks to my patrons who prevent this channel becoming derailed via a lateral angular discontinuity at a mechanical rail joint, and thank you very much for watching.